Good evening, folks. My name is Jacqueline Cousins Oliva, and today we're gonna do like a necessary. It's like an evening story time, but bedtime story. And today I'm gonna read right here this the World Treasury of Fairy tale and folklore, a family heirloom of stories to inspire and entertain. It's by Professor William Gray and Joanna Gila and Rose Williamson. It's a very nice book. It's a very patent leather book with gold and silver trimmings, gold and silver designs. There's an illustration right here. That's the reason I bought this book, because I like it. This type of book you could get from you can get this book from either Amazon, Books a Million. You can even get it from Barnes and Nobles, which a lot of these stores we have in Chicago. And these are table of contents from 16th and 17th century tale to 20th century folk tale collections. And the back of it reads, the World Treasury. Oh, the back of it. The back of this book reads, the World Treasury of Fake Tale and Folklores. A stunning new collection is a stunning new collection of some of the fantasy stories that have captivated readers all around the world for hundreds of years. The book features a variety of magical tales, from more familiar work on Brother Grimm's and Christian Andersen to some lesser known stories from Norway, Russia, India, and Philippines and Japan. The illuminating introduction explains the literary and historical context of the genre, 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 while brief note reveal the fascinating origins and the moral of each fairy tale. Beautifully illustrated with some stunning original artworks created especially for this edition. This continuously presented volumes and intended to be read for the sheer entertainment and tale gives, and to be treasured and enjoyed for all generations. And I'm going to read this 2-page introduction, and then when I start the next video, I'm going to start reading some of these stories. It's actually a 3-page introduction. So the introduction is folklore and fairy tale defines our culture. They are repositioned for human experience containing our wishes, fears, and dreams. Their procedures had a history that predates printing, and we told stories aloud before we wrote them down, and had become a craft tale to pass down through generations before we have created the paper on which to record these imaginative narratives. Today, many of those that we know are the best have known no author. They are, as they always have been, public property, even those with identifiable authors seem to have become part of the collection of imagination. We narrate, change, unpick, and we wave them to speak to the concerns of the time. They became part of our evolving history. This adaptive nature, endlessly changeable to the new taste, and yet always familiar to contribute to enduring the nature of folk and fairy tales today. This book this book contains both fairy tales and folk tales and fairy tales, but it can be difficult to separate the one from the other. Some scholars might argue that folk tales are oral and fairy tales come from a print tradition, but by seeking that parameter, we find that many times tales across from oral to print and vice versa, and to continue to do so today. Sometimes folk tales are described as tales of common common man, and fairy tales are a subset of this. The tale becomes a fairy tale when it contains wondrous elements. Undeniably, the two are in consistent conversation in this book. Encompass both traditions. Where do fairy tales begin? This is not an easy question to ask. Particular issues arise around consideration of the origin of the tales, their motives, and their plot. Some tales seem very familiar stories to ancient Greece and Rome. Some echo medieval romance and ballads of Europe. Many of them were first pinned to the shape we are familiar with in 16th century Italy. Some scholars argue that it was this particular urban Renaissance culture which is responsible for inventing what we think as what we think of as the fairy tale, and the genres focus on swift transformation and fortune reflect the rapid change of wealth and position that we key aspects to the city of light. Yet other thinkers, these ship-shaping stories have roots going back to far future, to before writing itself. These theorists trace these tales to time when reality and story were believed to be fair and intervene. This line of thinking suggests that key fairy tale tropes, such as the quest to the forest during which the child becomes an adult, we base on real rituals and folk practice. Thus, the tales we now tell for comfort and diversion were once serious practice of learning how to live with wild beings and wild shells. As intriguing as these ideas may be, questions of the fairy tale's origins have no answer, because oral stories leave no record but exist only in diabate. A story tale from West Africa described as the monster of breath that carries them. This is not a question that we can hope to answer definitely. Wherever they began and however much they record our past, our fairy tales also engraved with the desires, values, and understanding of the time which they were placed upon a rage, and the role of Arthur's storytell in collect and the role of Arthur storytell and collector, while important to distinguish, is also very often indistinguishable. What we don't know, however, what we don't know, however, follows a printed path across Europe. We know that the stories that which come to be called fairy tales were first written down in the 16th century Italy, especially in Venice and Naples. The bustling meeting place of the trade tales inspired two authors, Giovanni Francesco Strapola. I gotta look these people up. And it's my book. I bought it. I can write on it. Strapola, and later Giambrister Brazil. It's this person. To pen literary masterpiece by collecting together Italy's patchwork of traditional stories. The evolution of fairy tale continued in 17th century. 17th century. That's way back in the centuries. France, where a group of influential noble women gathered together salons to retell traditional stories. They adapted to tales to make them into subtle and witty critiques of the corruptions of the French court. It is to one of these women, Marie Catherine de Illinois, that we owe the term fairy tale, although the course of many of the stories that amplify the genre explain no fairy tales at all. The popularity of the fairy tales continued in French with the author Charles Perrault. And over 100 years later, sprung up with royal life in Germany, where two linguists named Jacob and William Grimm decided to make a collection of German stories. Many of the tales that first appeared in the Italian collection also appeared widely differing variants across the world. For example, instead of common dwarfs, Snow White has also tamed dragons in Scotland and ghouls in Morocco. Stories we never heard before. Versions of Cinderella rage in the thousands of found in Russia, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The stories alter dramatically depend on both when I like this dragon on the side. The stories are dramatically dependent on both when and where they were told. Each era of location, not to mention individual tellers themselves, to breathe individually into constantly evolving version of the stories. Both of the Grahams and Perrault had children in the mind where they we worked their tales, and thus edit the content and create stories appropriate for young audience. However, early versions written for adults tended to contain sexual and violent contents that been removed from nursery books. For example, in this collection, Rapunzel had not passively waited her fate, but conjures animals to defeat or grasp. An early version of Sleeping Beauty, the darker than bedtime stories we know today. These earlier tales are unsettling, and particularly given our association of the fairy tales innocent bedtime communications from parent to child. Yet these variants are also reminders that fairy tales are and always have been distillations of complex terrors and transformation of our lives. Last page finally. This collection is laid out to 5 selections. The first selection is 16th and 17th century. This collection is laid out into 5 sections. The first 16th and 17th century, as the contents that I showed you on the table of contents, contains stories from earliest days to genre, which begin to define the style of what we now consider to be fairy tales. The tales from Italy are advocated and familiar, but contain details that go against expectations set by more popular versions. The second section, or 18th century tales, contains tales that most Arthur translated mystics, a great wave of popularity of fairy tales and tales of wonder. On the heels of Arthur, such as Charles Perrault, Europe began to devour tales. The Arabian Nights helped fulfill this need, offering tales of aliens and other lands, both magical and real. The third section is 19th century folktale collection Peak. Wait. I think I mentioned 18th century already. The second one is 18th century tales, contains tales that are authored and translated amidst great wave of popularity of fairy tales of wonder. On the heels of Arthur, such as Charles Perrault, Europe began to devour tales. The Arabian Nights helped fulfill this need, offering the tales of aliens in both lands and other lands, both magical and real. The third section is 19th century folktale collection, peeks into folktales fever that comes over scholars during this era. The tales showcase stories authorized by collection who sought to preserve them for the future markers and original of national folk culture. The fourth section is 19th century literary tales. Literary tales. I gotta sound it out pretty perfect. Make sure it's perfect. Represent the simultaneous trend of fairy tale authorship that helped alongside folktale collecting. Inspired by tale collections, writers such as Hans Christian Andersen and Oscar Wilde began to pen their own stories, which took their place on a bookshelf next to the collection of Brother Grimm and Joseph Jacobs. Finally, the section 20th century folktale collection returns to tales that have been, in some sense, maintained as collectors heard them. More of these folktales originated outside of Europe, from India to the United States, demonstrating a desire of collection and readers to hear global tales from all corners of Earth. This collection celebrates the diversity of the genre, offering stories that range from sublime to the ridiculous to humorous to the tragic. They revoke the fantastical wonders of the marvelous crest, and often simultaneously celebrate and contemplate the magic of exist in the prosaic insistence of daily life. They reveal that our stories are our lives, and our lives are implicitly and absolutely contained in our stories. So that's the whole 4-page introduction. Next video, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this part, the 16th and 7th century tales. And I'm going to continue with these stories. This is a big, thick book. So, I'll see you in the next one. Love you all and have a blessed evening.